The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, and welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some reasons why your pressure side or return side cleaner may not be moving in your pool. You may find it sitting on the bottom of the pool or moving slowly. And I'll go over some of the common causes of why your pressure side cleaner is not moving in your pool. This podcast is brought to you by InyoPools.com. Inyo Pools has been helping pool owners find the right pool parts since 2001. With over 50,000 pool parts in stock, order online today and have the parts delivered right to your door. So I'm going to focus mainly on the more common cleaners that are in the pools, which would be the Polaris cleaners and the Pentair Legend cleaner. I'll touch a little bit on the Pentair Racer and the Hayward Trivac 500 and also the new Polaris Quattro Sport. But mainly the focus will be on the Polaris and the Legend cleaners, which is the most common pressure side cleaners that are in pools today. So first off, one of the most common reasons why your cleaner is not running in the pool, which I find to be the most common, is that your cleaner runs on a separate timer. Well, first let me back up a little bit. The pressure side cleaners work off of a booster pump, unless you're dealing with the Polaris 360, and Pentair also has a Legend version that runs off of the return lines without the booster pump. But primarily, the pressure cleaners that run off the booster pump gets its water from the main filtration system. So both your main pump, filter pump needs to be on, as well as a booster pump. So the first thing I look for when a customer tells me that their cleaner is not moving in the pool is I make sure that the booster pump timer is set or lined up with the main pump timer. If you have an automated system, usually you can check this very easily by going into the setting menu and seeing when you have the booster pump set to come on. It's very easy to do. Typically, the setups that are in my area are with two intermatic timers. So you have one timer for the main pool pump and one timer for the booster pump. So the booster pump needs to be running in the set schedule sometime in between when the main pump is on. So for instance, if your main pump runs from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., the Polaris, I'm going to just use Polaris as a default here. The Polaris should be running, the pump should be running, let's say from noon to 2 p.m. And that way you'll know that the cleaner is moving. The booster pump needs to have that water from the main pump for the Polaris cleaner to move in the pool. So if you notice that your cleaner is not moving in the pool, the first thing you want to check is to make sure that the timer for the booster pump is set for is set to run when the main pump is running. Otherwise, the booster pump will come on if it's not set for the main pump. You'll hear it come on and you'll hear it running, or you hear the pump running, but it's not going to fully prime up you would hear with both of them running together. So they need to be running together for the enough water pressure to be coming through the booster pump line to move the Polaris cleaner in the pool. And so if it's not running at the same time as the main pump, the cleaner is not going to have enough water pressure to actually move in the pool. The second most common reason why the cleaner is not moving is the debris screen is clogged up. And this could happen for a number of reasons. Typically, when you clean a cartridge filter, some of the debris will go back in the return line and it'll clog up the screen. So whenever I clean a filter on my route, cartridge or D filter, I make sure that I unplug the Polaris cleaner from the wall completely. And then after I clean the filter and put it back together, if it's a D filter, after I charge it with DE, I run the pool for 5 minutes. Then I turn it off and then I reattach the Polaris just to make sure that there's nothing in the line that will get into the screen and stop it from moving. So the screen is like a little thimble piece. The newer Polarises and the Trivac 500 come with a larger, same with the Racer, a larger screen that's in line. So check that for any kind of debris because that will stop the water flow from the cleaner. And the purpose of that screen is to prevent debris from going into the water management system, which are the tubes underneath. And I'll cover that a little bit later here. So primarily it's the booster pump not running at the same time as the main pump, or that debris screen is clogged up. and you want to check that periodically. It's really easy to check. Make sure there's a screen in there because that could also lead to other problems. Or if the screen is broken, make sure you replace it right away. And it doesn't take a lot of debris to clog up this debris screen. I've had Polaris cleaners stop moving when there's just a small amount of pebbles in there, maybe a little bit of St. Augustine grass. Sometimes it's fully clogged up. So if your DE filter has a leak in it, or if you have a sand filter and there's a problem with the laterals and sand is going back in the pool, the line for the pump, for the booster pump, is connected to the pool. Even though it doesn't technically run off the main line, debris will still get into this line and get clogged up in the screen, and that's why the screen is there to prevent that from happening. So if the DE filter does have a problem with the DE grids or the manifolds cracked, DE and dirt and debris is going to get back into the Polaris line and clog it up. So make sure that the filter, either cartridge or DE or sand, is running in an efficient manner, meaning that all the elements are good inside there. Good DE grids, good cartridge filters, and no broken laterals in the sand filter. And that'll prevent any debris from getting in there. Typically, unless there's something going through the filter system back into the pool, that debris screen will not get clogged up. So I have many pools on my route where the debris screen never gets clogged up. But again, as a rule of thumb, I disconnect them whenever I clean the filter, just in case some debris gets back to the return line and ends up in the booster pump line, which will clog up that screen pretty easily. So at the wall where the pressure cleaner is connected, all the manufacturers use a quick disconnect. This is pretty much standard in the industry. I think they all use a Polaris model of it. It's pretty standard, and this will crack sometimes. So you'll see a hairline crack on the quick disconnect. For the Polaris quick disconnect is a white piece with a little black knob at the end, and there's actually a way to regulate the flow with the quick disconnect by opening up that knob there and releasing water pressure. So sometimes that actually breaks also, and that's no longer regulating the water pressure. So you'll see a lot of water coming out of the quick disconnect, a lot more water than normal. And so that's one thing to look for as far as it not moving. So keep an eye on the quick disconnect. Make sure that there should be water coming out of there to regulate the pressure, but not a tremendous amount of water coming out of there. And if you notice the cleaner is not moving, and you notice that there's a tremendous amount of water coming out of the quick disconnect, either it has a crack or the regulator part that's part of all the quick disconnects of all the cleaners is broken and not regulating the water properly. So change that out. It's very easy to swap out. Just as a side note, if you notice that the quick disconnect has broken off inside the wall, or won't connect to the wall because the threaded fitting is no longer usable because there's notches on the threaded fitting of all the cleaners, and if those notches get broken off, the quick disconnect will no longer lock into the wall. So a lot of times when they put the wall fitting in, they don't put Teflon tape on it, which means that it gets really calcified in there and you can't unscrew it without breaking it. So a little trick, and I have a video on this also, is to actually put the quick disconnect back into the threaded fitting. Of course, the pool is off at this time, so there's no water coming out of it. And then with the quick disconnect in there, you're holding it with one hand. Then you get a pair of channel locks or a wrench of some type, and then you turn out the threaded fitting with the quick disconnect in there because it's not hollow. And since it's not hollow at that point, you have a less likely chance of breaking the wall fitting when you're getting out of the wall. So make sure that you put the quick disconnect in and then you remove the wall fitting with that in there. When it's hollow, it has a better chance of cracking as you're trying to untwist it. So a little side note there, if you ever notice that the quick disconnect is blown out of the wall, typically the clips that are on the wall fitting, it's the threaded wall fitting itself, are broken off inside there. And the only way to reconnect the quick disconnect is to put a new wall fitting in there, and then you would be able to snap the quick disconnect right back into it. So just a little note there so that you don't break it when you're actually trying to change it, and those do break on occasion. If you're using the Polaris 360, definitely there's a few other things to note with the return side cleaners. These are the cleaners that work off of just the return jets and don't require a separate booster pump. Pentair makes a Legend version also that is a non-booster pump cleaner also. And typically what I look for with the non-booster pump return side cleaners is I make sure that the filter is clean, because since they run off the return lines, the filter pressure is a factor. So if the filter PSI is really high and it's not getting a lot of return, the cleaner is not going to move well. I also check the pump basket, because the pump basket will also slow down the filter. Sometimes there's some debris in the impeller of the pump, which will also slow down the return. So basically anything that will slow down the return of the water to the pool will affect the return side cleaner. Another thing to check for is to make sure that some of the jets are sealed off on a pool with the Polaris 360 installed, or maybe some eyeball fittings are reduced. Anything to give more pressure to the actual line that the Polaris 360 is connected to. And a lot of times I'll get to a service account that has a Polaris 360 and I'll have to make some adjustments to fine tune it. In other words, I'll plug off one of the threaded return lines, or I'll reduce some of the return jets because it's just not moving at a rapid pace because it wasn't set up correctly. I have some setup videos on the Polaris 360 there also on my channel, but basically you're also looking for the return going to the pool as a factor with the return side, or the Polaris cleaners that are connected to the return line that are non-booster pump cleaners. So that's also a factor with those cleaners added on to the other parts that I've been talking about. They all have the same parts regardless if they're connected to a booster pump or just a return jet. So the other parts also come into play with the Polaris 360 return side cleaner. The next thing you want to focus on after you checked all of that is the actual cleaner itself, to see if there's anything mechanical wrong with it. So for the Polaris 280 and for the Legend models, they're a Driveshaft driven cleaner, and so there actually are notches or teeth on the wheels themselves. And check that first. That's the first thing I look for, is to make sure that the wheels aren't worn, the notches on the wheels aren't worn down. I call them teeth, and that they're not worn down. If they're worn down, the drive shaft won't catch and it won't turn the wheels, and so that makes the cleaner not move. So I look for that first. That's usually the first thing that happens with the Polaris and the Legend cleaner, is that the wheels are worn down and it's not catching the drive shaft. The other Polaris models, the 360 and 380, use a band that drive it, and this band wears out. So check, if it's, usually I would say give the Polaris about 3 to 5 years before the band starts to wear out on the Polaris 380 and the Polaris 360 cleaner. Once that band wears out, the cleaner is not going to move very well in the pool. It'll move slowly or not at all. So that's one thing to look for in that cleaner. For the other more advanced cleaners, the Racer also is a drive shaft driven cleaner. So make sure that you check the same parts that you would check for the Polaris 280 on the Racer. The Trivac 500 uses a different kind of water management system, and usually they're pretty reliable, but if those break down, you may have to take it into your local pool store to look at, because those are relatively new. Even though they use the Phantom schematics on that, you may not be familiar with fixing the Trivac 500. The Racer is also a very difficult cleaner to work on. There's just a lot of parts in there. I've rebuilt them. I should actually put a video up on YouTube of one that I rebuilt. But those are also cleaners that you may want to take into your local pool shop to look at. In fact, anytime your pressure cleaner stops moving, it's not a bad idea to take it to your local pool shop to look at, whether it's a Leslie's pool store or a mom and pop store. They'll be able to look at it and troubleshoot the actual cleaner itself, because sometimes it's hard to do it as a homeowner out there. As a service tech, you can also bring it into your supplier, and they'll be able to check it out for you, no problem. I've taken many Polaris cleaners into my supplier when I don't have time to take them apart myself, and they'll take them apart and tune them up for me. They have ways of testing it with a hose, a high pressure hose at the supply at the warehouse. So I'll take them in on occasion. Also, the bearings wear out. A good sign, a telltale sign that the bearings are worn out in the cleaner, is that you actually see the bearings in the pool, or they'll be in a debris bag. And that's also something that you can easily change by taking the tires off and putting the bearings in. And almost all the cleaners use the bearing system in the wheel. So if you notice it's not moving, and you notice that the wheels, or you see little BBs in the pool, those are the bearings that have come out because the casing of the bearing has cracked. And so if the bearings aren't working in the cleaner, they're not going to move very effectively, or not even at all in the pool. And I also have several videos on my YouTube channel and how to change the bearings on the various Polaris cleaner and the Pentair Legend cleaner. So that's one thing to look at. I do have a new Quattro Sport on my route, and I notice one thing that stops the Quattro Sport, and I'm not sure if Polaris is aware of that. It's not a big deal, but the robotic type brush on front sometimes will get a large leaf wrapped in there, typically an avocado type leaf where it's really large, and that'll get jammed into the scrubbing brush and it'll stop the cleaner. So if you have a Polaris Quattro Sport, you notice it's not moving in the pool, chances are the brush got jammed with a large debris, a large leaf debris of some type, and simply pull it out of the brush and it'll start moving again. That's the only thing I've found so far that will stop the Quattro Sport, is something that jams the brush in front. Not a big deal, doesn't happen very often, but it can happen with that particular cleaner. As far as the other cleaners, one thing that you want to be aware of is the backwash valve that sits in line on the Polaris and the Pentair cleaners. The Racer and the Trivac 500 and of course the Quattro Sport all have the backup valve built into the cleaner, so it'll actually there's no way to actually see it because it's inside the cleaner itself. So the backup valve on the Polaris and Legend sit outside on the hose, and this sometimes will fail, and you'll know it's failed if the water is continuously shooting out of it. And if the water is continuously shooting out of the backup valve, there's no way for the cleaner to move forward because the backup valve is engaged and there's no water going to the cleaner itself. So be aware that the backup valves do fail, they crack, or the mechanism, the gears jam up in there and the water will continuously shoot out of them. And in that case, simply replacing the backup valve on the Polaris and the Pentair Legend line will correct that problem. So something to be aware of. It does happen more than you think, and that's usually a problem that's often overlooked, that the backup valve is continuously engaged. It should only be working every 2.5 to 3 minutes, and it should only be running for about 30 seconds or less at a time. So if you notice it running longer than that, then it definitely failed. And included with the Polaris cleaner, and also with, I believe the Legend has these also, and the Racer, are the blue and red discs that go into quick disconnect. And this is to restrict flow to the cleaner itself if there's too much pressure coming out of the booster pump. So these will actually restrict the flow. I believe the red disc restricts it even more than the blue disc. And if you notice that it's not moving, you can actually remove these discs from the quick disconnect so that it gets the full flow from the booster pump. See if that corrects the problem with the cleaner not moving well in the pool by removing the disc entirely from the quick disconnect. Or you can use the blue disc, which will restrict less flow than the red disc, depending on which disc is in there. So that could also be a problem to look at, is if there's a disc in the quick disconnect, which disc is in there, and if it does need one in there at all to regulate the flow from the booster pump. So I mentioned that the screen in the beginning of the podcast is a debris screen, is to keep debris from getting clogged in the cleaner's water management system. So these are the tubes that are underneath the cleaner that the water flows through. And a way to know if these are clogged is if the booster pump is running and the venturi that are in the mouth of the cleaner, you want to hold it out of the water, and there should be a really strong jet of water coming out of the Polaris, the Legend, the Racer, the Trivac 500. The jet of water should be really strong, like a garden hose on. If you don't see that strong jet of water, chances are something got past the screen. Either there was a hole in it or it wasn't inserted, and it's clogging up those tubes in the water management system. So you have to take the cleaner completely apart, take the tubes off, and check those for debris. And it happens very often. Those get clogged up and the cleaner is not running. So check the water management system on your cleaner to make sure there's no pebbles or grass or anything that's stuck in there that got past the debris screen. And that often will stop the cleaner from moving. And you'll try to change everything else. You have to change all the parts, and that's usually the last thing that you'll notice or you'll look at is the water management system and the tubes are clogged up. So keep that in mind also, that if you're changing all the parts and it's still not moving, there's a good chance that there's something clogged up in the water management system itself from debris that got past the screen. And of course, this doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. The actual cleaner itself will get clogged up with something. Typically, it's a toy that's been left in the pool. It'll get sucked up into the Polaris, and it'll stop it from moving, of course, because the venturi aren't able to push water through and move the cleaner along. So I've had various things clog it up. Definitely, if there's a windstorm, a big pile of debris will clog up the cleaner. It's not going to move. A lot of times, it's again typically a toy that gets sucked up inside there that stops the cleaner, and simply, of course, pull the cleaner out, and you can see if there's anything jammed up in the cleaner, stopping it from moving. But very uncommon because the opening is so huge that it'll just pick up anything from a rat to golf balls. It won't have any problem with debris like that. It typically won't have any problem with debris clogging it up, but that is something that you should look at also. And so to recap, you want to check to make sure the booster pump is running at the same time as the main pump. Check the debris screen to make sure it's not clogged up. Check the quick disconnect to make sure that it's not cracked or not open too much, letting too much water pressure out. Also check to see what disc is in there, the red or the blue one, or none at all, depending on how much pressure you need. And you want to make sure to refer to the manual to see how many wheel revolutions per minute is necessary to move the cleaner along. And that's how you kind of fine tune it with the quick disconnect, with the discs in there. You want to make sure it has enough water pressure. Typically a 3/4 horsepower booster pump will get any of these pressure cleaners working without any adjustments really, unless there's a problem with the system itself. Or if you're using some kind of jerry-rig system, you want to make sure you have enough water going to the cleaner to move it. Then you want to check the cleaner itself for any mechanical problems with the drive shaft, with the wheels, with the bearings, with the belts, with the water management system if it's clogged up with debris. There's not much else that can stop these cleaners from moving except those things that I mentioned in this podcast. They're highly reliable, and you can usually find out the reason they're not moving by following these steps, going down these steps until you find the actual problem with the cleaner. And it's got to be one or maybe two of these things that are happening that cause the cleaner not to move. So if you're a homeowner looking for more help with your pressure cleaner, definitely check out my website. I have a lot of helpful links for a new cleaner if you want to purchase one. I also have an ebook available for $9.99 that covers all of the pool care for your pool. You can find these resources at swimmingpoollearning.com. And if you do service for a living and you're looking for more one-on-one help or more resources for your business, definitely check out my coaching program. Currently, there's over 230 members in the group. And there's a great group chat that's going through the GroupMe app where you can actually post questions and get them answered. Of course, you can also text me and call me in real time through the coaching program. You can learn more about that at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. InyoPools.com has been helping pool owners find the right pool parts since 2001. With over 50,000 pool parts in stock, order online today and have the parts delivered right to your door.